Hello again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher, and this is episode number 5 of my struggle with the ESSEX engine. I hope that this will be the last part, but it may take yet one more part, I'm not sure. If you watched the last episode, you may have noticed that I was mildly, well, extremely discouraged by the whole thing and had great buyer's remorse, but a couple days have passed and I have renewed my enthusiasm and energy, so I'm going to give it another try here. And in a minute here, I'm going to tell you what my strategy is here for troubleshooting, because it will run with enough heat, as you well know, but not with this burner. So here's what I plan on doing. I'm going to disassemble it again. Of course, I have to take off the tank here, which is kind of a pain in the neck. But again, what I'd like to do is take the burner off if I can and install a different burner, a propane burner. I'll show you in a second. But I discovered yet one other thing here as I was playing with it just this morning, and that is that the displacer here used to be very free running. That is, could move back and forth very easily, but I seem to have developed a bind there, and I do not know why, but I'm going to work on that after I take it apart. But if I can get this burner out of here, well, I know I can get it out of there. What I want to do is put one of my little propane burners in here, but this one is way too high, as you can see. So, and I made these years ago. So here's one that is much lower, as you can see, and that probably will fit under there and serve at least as a temporary one for experimentation. Remember, I have no intention of permanently modifying or defacing a beautiful antique like this. About 20 years ago, when I was playing around more with steam engines, I built this little copper boiler, and this little burner was mounted inside there in the furnace, if you will. There's a superheater in here too, by the way. And it's just propane powered is what it is. So that's where I got that burner. But, oh, and don't tell anybody about the asbestos that I have on here. I got a whole roll of that. I have to turn that in to the authorities before the Gestapo comes. All right. This is one of my homemade Stirlings. You've seen these. But a good Stirling engine that will run real well is very free turning, as I told you, and it tends to have a little compression, and you will see that it rebounds. The fit in here in the power piston has to be exquisite. I mean, it just has to be perfect, such that when you pull that out, it goes like the cork on a champagne bottle. I do not have that rebound here, and it feels a little stiff when I get into this position, so I need to explore that as well. Alright, I'm going to disassemble. Okay, now take a look at the displacer rod here. It's incredibly stiff all of a sudden. And as I rotate it, it sounds like the displacer might be rubbing the side of this end of the casting. I'm wondering if I overheated it and something warped or bent in there. But that is the very first thing I have to look at, because no way that's going to run. Oh wait, there it loosened up a little bit. What the heck? Even that is too tight. And when I get it into that position, I almost can't move it. Alright. Apart it comes. Okay, most of this is apart. There's a nice cast iron base. And that's the burner. Okay, I have it almost completely disassembled at this point, but I cannot get this little knobulated thing off of the rod. It doesn't appear to be threaded on. It must be pressed on. I think I'm going to cut it off because I'd like to make a new rod anyway. And I need to do that in order to get the displacer out of there. Well, here is the so-called furnace. You can see the asbestos in there. Now, I think I discovered what might be a problem, or one of the problems. Do you remember in one of the videos, it might have even been in my plea for help. Those are not published videos anymore, I don't believe. But when I looked in here, I saw what looked like a wrinkle. Wrinkle? I'm thinking of Pringles. So, what's happened there, even before I owned it, obviously, it got overheated in several areas here. Can you see that it's actually wrinkled here from overheating? And that was what I was seeing when I looked in the bore in a much earlier video. This is brass and is extremely thin-walled. That's the displacer that you see in there, so I would like to get the displacer out of there, even if I have to ruin that this rod here. I can't seem to get the brass tubing out of the water-cooled end. I have no idea what holds that in there, but it might even be soldered in. So I'm not going to get that out. But the idea now, I would like to get the displacer out of there and see if there's any damage to it. And if not, I would like to make a mandrel, expanding type mandrel, that I could put inside the tubing and very carefully, like a body man, try to smooth that out so that the displacer can move freely. There also was an interference because of that wrinkle in regard to the piston moving in and out, and that might be, I'm trying to solve a riddle here, why Bubba beat the heck out of the thing. Maybe the thing was stuck in there and he just had to pound it out, and that could have been done 70 years ago. Alright, I'm going to cut this off. Okay, I cut the end off of the displacer rod. There it is right there. It's still too hot to touch. So let's remove the displacer now. It's much longer than what I thought. I thought it would be about that long. It's almost double that length. I hope that I can get that rod out of there. I don't know. This here on the end almost appears to be some kind of fiber, not wood. So you can see here when you examine this where it has been rubbing, and that was part of the problem, that it was rubbing on this where it is wrinkled. I sure hope I can get that rod out of there. I don't know if it's threaded in or what. And this is also brass, I believe. Yeah. It's a little heavier than what I would have expected, because you really want the displacer to be as lightweight as possible. Okay, I was able to get the displacer rod out, and it is not threaded. It must have been pressed in there. We know they didn't use Loctite back then. So it was in about that far. Well, it's an hour later, and I've taken a piece of 2-inch cold roll, turned it down. I've got a rod in here, it's simply a handle, but the idea here, albeit ill-conceived, and that's a pretty good fit. I didn't want to struggle too badly with it, but to put it in there where the deformation is and gently, ever so gently, tap it into submission. Now maybe I'll need to heat it, or maybe it can't be done at all. This is strictly an experiment. But the whole idea is, and so on. Let's see what happens. Well, I have a little bit of improvement in there in regards to the way that I tapped on it, but I might have discovered the root problem from day one. There is a hole right here. Now I would love to just solder it. It would be so easy. This is brass. To soft solder it, but I do not know if it would if that would work. It might melt right away. It needs to be hard soldered, that is silver soldered, but that would be kind of difficult to do because the wall of this is so thin that I'm afraid I could pop through it and then the whole thing is scrap. Okay, I did silver solder that little hole with Stay Bright. It's not pretty, but it should hold because this area right here is right over the flame. So soft solder I think would melt almost instantly. Good morning, it's the next day. I had a good night's sleep and here's where I am right now. I did silver solder this little hole, remember, just a few minutes ago, actually yesterday. Well, the other thing is that at one time I had to cut this rod off. Do you remember that? There's the old one. So that's a new piece of 1/4 inch drill rod, extra long, already pressed in here. So I'm ready to install this. You know, one of the problems I've had is all of this brass is incredibly thin walled and soft. And this piece of brass is only 28 thousandths thick here. It's almost like foil, so you can actually pinch it and distort it. It's been annealed a million times, I guess is what you could say. All right, so I ruined this piece, as you know, because I had to saw it off. I had no idea how this piece was fastened in there. Well then, after cleaning it up and taking it apart, I did find out that at the bottom of the threaded hole there is a slotted set screw. Well, I thought I'll go ahead and take that out, but I couldn't even begin to budge it, and the little well, I used this screwdriver and it just ruined the screw. So what I'm doing here, I took a piece of hexagon brass, I got a cross hole of 1/4 reamed, a little set screw on that end, and the 1024 thread on the other end, and that'll go on like this. Now that will allow me to set the timing, so to speak. By timing I mean how far back the displacer goes or how far forward it goes can be adjusted with that. So that'll help me a lot. It's actually ready to start assembling, so I think I'll do as so. Okay, it's 45 minutes later. I've been struggling with this, but it's partially reassembled, and notice that there's a little bit of that bounce back now. It seems to move pretty freely, so now I need to attach the rod that actuates the displacer. So let me put that on and see what happens. The assembly is just about complete, and what I've done here on this end is I position the displacer as far out as it would go and then moved it in a 1/16 of an inch or less, and then tighten the little set screw on the back side. Now of course the rod's way too long. I'll cut that off here at a later time. It runs fairly smooth. Not runs, turns. But will it run when I fire it up? Now notice that I have not put the burner back on. The original gasoline burner I'm going to use for a test run. This little propane fired one that will fit under there pretty well. Be back in a minute. Well, I've been fiddling around here for about an hour, and I got it to almost run, and then suddenly, poof, the solder melted, and it started sucking in the flame and blowing the flame out. I don't know if it's going to do that right now, but in other words, I got a hole in the brass tubing, and the hole is actually a little bit bigger than it was to start with, because I wallowed it out a little bit, as you will recall, with that probe, where is it here, and that needle in preparation for the soldering. Well, herein lies my folly. Remember that the brass tubing here is about this thick, and is dead soft from being annealed over and over and over, where this still is pretty well tempered. So I just grabbed off the shelf here. I got quite a bit of silver solder, and I grabbed this Stay Bright, and that's what I used to solder it. I looked on here for the percentages and all that, and the melting point, and it did not tell. But later that night, this is the next day, I realized by looking it up that the temperature, melting temperature, is 430 degrees. Not much different than regular lead soft solder. But there's no lead in here, but it's primarily tin. Look at how limber it is, just like lead solder. That should have been my clue right away, because silver solder tends to be, and I don't know what kind this is, but it's incredibly springy, almost like spring steel. And I've got all kinds of the stuff. This one is unidentified, well, all-state silver brazing alloy, but you know, I don't know anything about it. But at least on the Harris products, like Stay Silver here, I wrote that down years ago. I don't know why they don't put that on there. That's the thing we really want to know. But that's, you know, it's like brazing rod, and so is the Stay Silver 45. And by the way, this stuff is incredibly expensive. I think that this is about $60 if you had to buy it. Of course, I got it at an auction. But anyway, the melting temperature of brass is what, about 1800, so I know darn well if I attempted to silver solder it with one of these, that poof, I'm going to blow right through it. It's a lot like trying to weld a spider web. You know, it's just not going to happen. So at this point here, again, discouragement is starting to set in. But I do like the idea that several people suggested, and that was to take this burner out. And it's very easy to get in and out of there. I didn't realize it would be that easy. There are just 3 screws right here that hold it in place. But this wasn't functioning properly either. I do think that Bubba bored that hole out a little bit, or reamed it out, and that's part of the problem. But regardless of what burner I use, it's not going to run at this time. But that would fit in there just nice. That would have been a perfect solution to that if I didn't have a hole in this brass. Some of you are going to suggest that I use some mechanical type of plug in that hole, simply like a very, very small screw. But that isn't going to work, because it's pretty tight fit in here, and the displacer moves back and forth across that little hole. So if there was some kind of fastener in there, it would obstruct the movement of it. So I can't do that. It has to be done with silver solder, but I tell you, I don't want to blow a hole in that tubing big enough to stick my little finger in it. So that's why I'm extremely hesitant to continue with the repair at this time. So I'm wrapping up part 5 here. There may or may not be a part 6, depending on my degree of discouragement and disgust over the whole thing. And I still like to leave this in such a condition that somebody that wants to put more effort into it than what I do, and is more talented and has a lot more time and devotion to these old engines, and as a younger man, they can still get it going by whatever method that they use. I also had thought about patching it a little bit with a piece of this. almost like a tire patch. But again, that would have to be soldered with high temperature solder, not this soft stuff here. And I should have realized that right away, and that it didn't take me all that much heat to do the soldering. So that was my own incompetence and ignorance there that caused that. However, I did it no harm. You know, according to the Hippocratic Oath, a doctor is to do no harm. Well, that concludes part 5 of this video odyssey working on the ESSEX engine, and again, it was a failure, at least up to this point. So this might be the last you see of this, but then again, if I get renewed energy and desire, I may continue on it, but for right now I'm kind of stumped and discouraged, so I may just pass it on to someone else who, you know, has a little more tenacity than me. I got a lot of other things I want to do and not much time to do it, so I just don't want to waste any more time on this, but I sure would have liked to see it running properly, and in fact, it did run in one of the other episodes, but with that little pinhole in there, there were 2 things that were required, or actually one, is that I needed a lot more heat to make it run. Well, more heat can do more damage, and as several people said, it shouldn't take all that much heat to make it run. You don't have to turn that thing red hot. If you do, there's something wrong. And the root problem, of course, was that little hole, but it took a long time for me to discover that, but now, as I said, the hole's a little bit larger from my mistakes. So, all right, that's the end of this chapter. See you next time. There's a bunch of still pictures to follow, and a short clip of my grandson Henry as he discovers electricity. So long for now. Keep watching. See you in the next video. Okay, she's running quite nicely now on propane, as you can see, but it should not take that much heat. It should not require that much heat, because that's a pretty hot flame.
Starts off
Crank
slow.
like mad, real fast.
So it starts off slow.
Yeah. Again, real fast.
And then fast. Do you got it on video?
Yeah.
So slow.
Again.